For most people who don't play retro video games, these old giant CRT TVs are relics of the past. Giant, heavy, cumbersome space takers that are a burden until you get rid of them. Heck, I see these things on the side of the street all the time. Everybody used to have these things. This is just what a TV was for so long. And now pretty much nobody has them, except for retro gamers. You see, these TVs are actually one of the most coveted ways to play retro games, and some will even tell you that they're the only way to play retro games. Now, personally, I wouldn't go that far, and while there are some very respectable options and solutions for playing these games on more modern TVs, this video is all about explaining the benefits of CRT TVs. Okay, so the biggest thing right off the bat would have to be the resolution. Most HD TVs display at a resolution of anywhere between 1280 by 720 all the way up to 3840 by 2160 pixels if you have a 4K TV. Compare this to something like the Super Nintendo, which typically displays games at a resolution around 256 by 224. Now, it doesn't take a math genius to realize that is a much lower resolution, and so guess what happens when you try to run games at that resolution on a TV with a much larger resolution? That's right, it gets stretched out and distorted, even if you keep your TV set to a 4:3 aspect ratio, whereas an older CRT is more suited for the resolution. Another big benefit you get with CRTs when it comes to image quality would be what are called scan lines. Scan lines are basically just these black lines that run horizontally across the screen, alternating with each horizontal line of the image. Now, oftentimes modern implementations of retro games will come with options to replicate scanlines, and some people actually just don't enjoy scanlines altogether. But with that said, there's a certain appreciation retro gamers have for the distinct scanlines that come from CRTs. The look of these scanlines can really only come from a TV like this because of how the pixels are displayed on screen. Is the appreciation for this look tied to nostalgia? Perhaps it is, but the idea is that these scanlines help better define the pixel artwork commonly seen with older games. That's how I see it. Either way, because not everybody agrees with this, or more casual gamers may just not care, you often see backlash from people who are very hardcore about their belief that playing these older games without scanlines is basically sacrilegious. Personally, anybody playing retro games is a winner in my book, so I wouldn't hold it against them, but it probably helps to at least be aware of scanlines when deciding which visual style you prefer. Alright, now it's time to talk about performance. Regardless of what you may think about the look you get on a CRT, it's hard to argue with how they perform. And when I talk about performance, I'm mostly talking about input lag. Input lag is basically a delay from the time you press a button to when that button input actually registers on screen. This is generally measured in milliseconds, and while it may not seem like a lot, for games that require very precise timing, it can be noticeable if the lag is high enough. Pretty much all modern HD TVs have varying degrees of this due to the processing of the image that needs to be done. Well, luckily our good old CRTs are simple enough that this processing is left out, and the result is zero input lag. However, it's worth mentioning that there are some super late models of CRTs that try to do weird stuff with HDMI inputs and so forth, and these can actually have input lag, so just be wary of those. Anyways, having zero input lag is extremely ideal for retro games. A lot of these games require very precise inputs, and so having zero input lag, well, yeah, that's gonna be helpful. So I think the idea you should be starting to get here is that it's almost like CRTs are custom tailored to retro video games, like a custom tailored suit. It makes sense. I mean, these TVs were the standard at the time these retro games were made. And here's another thing, you know light gun games? Well, you actually cannot use these old light guns on modern HD TVs. You have to have a CRT for those, though I should mention there are some workarounds. The reason why can get a bit technical, but the basic idea is that these light guns rely on the way CRTs refresh their image and the type of light they emit for the gun to detect. Okay, now I want to talk about some of the obstacles when it comes to having a CRT and obtaining a CRT. They're easy enough to find from people either trying to get rid of them or sell them for cheap. But the most glaring issue is just the sheer size and bulk of these things. They are huge and heavy as all hell. If you can live with a TV that's 20 inches or less, it becomes a lot more manageable. But once you get over 20 inches, things start to get really big and really heavy. To make matters worse, the weight distribution is really funky. Most of the weight is in the front of the TV, which can make them really awkward to carry. So what's the solution to all of this? Well, have somebody help you lift it if possible, and make sure you're really certain where you want it to be. That way you hopefully only ever have to move it once. Set it and forget it. For example, my TV has been sitting here in my game room for years now, and even though I really wanted to move it for this video so that I could recreate what I looked like carrying this thing 2 full blocks by myself when I first got it, that was a proud day by the way, it's just way too complicated to get all the cords plugged back in with the way I have it situated. Okay, I got one more tip before I wrap things up here. You're going to want to pay attention to what kind of inputs your CRT has. Now, if you're in the US, you'll want to look for the slightly more rare TVs that have component inputs, which is the red, green, and blue for video, with the additional red and white for audio. However, you'll almost definitely be able to find one that at least has composite video, which is the standard yellow with red and white for audio. This is okay, but if you want to upgrade, then in between composite and component, we have S-Video, which while not quite as good as component, is still very respectable. If you're in European countries, then things are much simpler, as you can just use something called SCART, which has great quality. Now, it is possible to use SCART in the US, but you'll need a converter to change it into something a US TV can accept, which is most likely going to be component. That's actually the method I use, and I think it looks great. Okay, so I think that about does it for this video. I know some of this can sound a bit technical, and I tried to keep it as simple as possible. With that said, feel free to ask any questions you might have in the comments section. Also, for this week's question, I'd like to ask how you hook up your retro games and what your reason is for doing so. There's so many different options, and I'd be curious to see what people have to say. Alright, so go ahead and leave those comments down below, and I will see ya in the next video. Oh, and by the way, I looked up the original price of my TV, and it was $2,600. I hauled it away for free. That's crazy, right?